All right, here is the last video from 2015. We're doing all the non-calculator ones, and this is question 6. I don't think it was the hardest one. I actually think one of the earlier ones, maybe at 4 or 5, was a little tougher. This question is almost entirely a chapter 2 based question. I like it because it reviews some old things that you haven't thought about in a while, and again, you don't need a calculator. So here's how it starts. They give you a derivative or an original equation, and they actually tell you what the derivative is, which is kind of interesting that they don't make you derive it implicitly. They're going to actually make you use the derivative instead of actually come up with it on your own. So part A wants you to write an equation for a tangent line, really common question. You need a point, which they give you, negative 1, 1, and you need the slope, which can be found by plugging your point into your derivative, which they also give you. So they actually give you a lot for part A. So you're going to put negative 1 in for x, you're going to put 1 in for y, and you're going to get a slope of 1/4, and then you're going to write your tangent line equation in any form you want. I think point slope's the easiest because there's the least amount of work you have to do with it. So there is my answer. They gave 2 points, which to me is a pretty easy couple points to earn. 1 point for the slope of 1/4 and 1 point for any version of the tangent line. They got y by itself, but you don't have to. Then part B wanted you to write when are the points where you would have a vertical tangent line. So vertical tangent line, straight up and down, means that it has to have an undefined slope. So that means that the denominator of the derivative has to equal 0. So that's the first thing I wrote down. Vertical slope means undefined. That means that the 3y squared minus x has to equal 0. Now, the challenge here, and here's where some algebra gets in, is you can't use this to find immediately what x or y is. You actually have to do some extra work. So I actually solved it for x because I thought that was very easy to get x by itself, just add it to the other side. And then you have to go back to the original equation in order to find your x and your y. So you're going to take this 3y squared, you're going to go back to the original equation right here, and everywhere you see an x, which in this case is only in one spot, you're going to replace it with 3y squared. So here's my work. Here's my original equation. You'll notice the x has now been replaced with 3y squared. This ends up being y cubed minus 3y cubed. Those are like terms. You get negative 2y cubed. That equals 2, and that is something you can solve without a calculator. Divide by negative 2, take the cube root. You end up getting y to be negative 1. Once you know what y is, you're going to put it right back into this statement up here to figure out what x is. And then you can either leave it as x equals and y equals, or you can write it as an ordered pair. As far as their scoring, they gave 1 point if you realize that the denominator has to equal 0. Even if you have no idea what to do with that, you get a point. You get 1 point for then getting your original equation all in one variable. And they did it the same way I did it. It would be the easiest. You could go the long way and replace all your y's. That would be a little messier. And then your last point is if you actually got your answer. And you could write it again as x equals y equals like this, or you could write it as an ordered pair 3, negative 1. Just make sure you put it in the right order if you do it that way. And then part C wanted you to find the second derivative, which we've actually done in some of these FRQs lately. That's going to be an implicit second derivative, and then use that second derivative to figure out a value at negative 1, 1 for that second derivative. So I want to derive this. That's going to be a quotient rule. So that's the first thing I wrote down, I think. Yeah. So I want to derive this. It's a quotient rule. So bottom times the derivative of the top. The derivative of y is dy dx, minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, which is 6y dy dx minus 1, all over the bottom squared. So it's a huge quotient rule. What I wouldn't do at this point is I wouldn't take time to start simplifying it. I think that's way more algebra than you want to do. What I thought was easier is I went off to the side and figured out what do I get for dy dx when I put in negative 1, 1. Well, the nice thing is I actually already did that in part A. I started to do it again and then realized I had just done this. You get 1/4. So I'm going to replace all my dy dx's with 1/4. You'll see it there and you'll see it there. I'm also going to replace all my x's with negative 1. I'm going to replace all my y's with positive 1. You can use a calculator. I didn't think you needed it too much in this one. You end up getting 4 times a fourth, which is 1. Minus, you get 3 halves minus 1, which is a half. So you get 1 minus a half. And then your denominator ends up being 4 squared, which is 16. So you get 1/2 divided by 16, which is 1/32. This was not a calculator question, so I didn't put the decimal equivalent. Here's how they scored it. You get 2 points for the derivative implicitly, mainly because it's a quotient rule. which is the first level of complexity. And it's also a quotient rule that has an implicit in it. So I think that's why they gave 2 points for that. And you'll notice no simplifying happened. You get 1 point if you realize that you should replace your dy dx with the 1/4 value. Now, you could replace dy dx with what dy dx equals. It just gets really big and kind of balloons at that point. So it is simpler to replace it with just the constant value of 1/4. And then your final answer, the 1/32, would be the last point. So again, going through, I didn't think this one was too awful. 2 points for part A, 3 points for part B, and 4 points for part C. And that is the end of the 2015. I'm not going to do 1 and 2 with you because they are very calculator focused, and one of them actually is material we didn't cover. So at this point, I am going to ask, once you've gone over all 4, that you give me a total score out on the questions 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's 9 points each times 4. The most you could have earned is 36. So I'm going to send out a form, and you can tell me how many you got out of 36. Thank you guys, and I'll talk to you later.